$412 million vanished, just gone. 38 working-class towns from the heartland to the edge of Appalachia were promised renewal. They got silence. Jobs disappeared, hospitals closed, flags folded for the last time, and in the center of it all, one memo, one set of initials in red ink. NPJD. Vance didn't just stumble on the truth. He read it, aloud, on national television. And when he finished, you could hear it, the silence of lawmakers who thought no one would ever dig that deep. But he did. And what he found didn't just shock Congress. It cracked open a question many of us have whispered for years. If they could erase 38 towns with the stroke of a pen, how many more are we standing on and don't even know it? While this story is a work of dramatized fiction, every beat of it is rooted in something real. Real fears, real losses, real questions no one ever answered. We may have imagined the characters, but the America they're fighting for? That part was never made up. Stay with us. Every second of this story was built for someone who's still waiting to be heard. The chamber was full. Not the kind of full that meant attendance. The kind of full that meant expectation. Suits shifted in their seats. Pens clicked. Lanyards glinted beneath fluorescent lights. Reporters scanned faces like hawks. Everyone was waiting for what? No one could quite say. It was just another budget hearing on paper. But everyone could feel it. Something off. Like the air was holding its breath. At the center of it all sat Nancy Pelosi, composed as ever. Sharp jacket, sharper eyes. She didn't look worried, not even close. Her aides clustered near her like satellites, checking their phones, whispering reminders. She nodded, smiled faintly. She had done this dance before, hundreds of times. This was her arena. And across the room, almost invisible to the cameras, sat J.D. Vance. No entourage, no advisors fussing over him. Just a single man in a Navy suit that still creased like it had come straight from a garment bag in Ohio. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't even looking at the crowd. He was staring at a manila folder on the table in front of him, labeled in black ink, line 47. No one noticed at first. He didn't ask for attention. But if they had looked closely, they might have seen the way his thumb pressed just slightly into the edge of the folder, like he was keeping something from boiling over. Not rage, not nerves, something quieter. Conviction. The committee chair began the usual script. Welcomes, roll call, some vague reference to transparency and trust in public allocation. People nodded, staffers typed, cameras rolled. Then names were called. Third on the list, Senator J.D. Vance. You have 5 minutes. J.D. stood slowly, adjusted his collar. No prepared statement. No folder flipped open. Pelosi turned toward him without turning her head. Just her eyes. The way someone trained in Washington learns to detect a threat before the room does. J.D. spoke. Calm, clear, even gentle. I was going to talk today about workforce development, he began. I was going to talk about broadband expansion in Appalachia. A pause. But something came across my desk last month. Something I wasn't supposed to find. Heads lifted. The room shifted. Barely perceptible, but real. A microsecond of unease. Pelosi's top aide leaned forward. A spreadsheet buried in a legacy file from a shuttered office. Budget allocations. Draft revisions. Dozens of changes. J.D. reached down and tapped the folder labeled line 47. 38 towns, all marked for recovery funding, all removed. A rustle. Paper. Feet repositioned. Somewhere a camera operator zoomed in. They weren't cut by accident. They weren't deferred. They were erased. The chair raised a brow. Senator, do you have documentation to support? I do. J.D.'s voice didn't rise, but somehow it felt louder. But I'm not here just to submit evidence. I'm here because someone needs to say their names out loud. That was the sentence, the one that stopped the room. Because in that moment, no one knew what he meant. Not fully, but they knew enough to understand this wasn't a 5-minute speech anymore. This was something else. Nancy Pelosi closed her binder, slowly, without a word. And in that silence, thick, heavy, anticipating, J.D. Vance reached for the folder. And somewhere quietly, a congressional aide who had seen hundreds of hearings leaned over to a colleague and whispered, This one's going to go viral." JD didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence in the chamber was already doing the work for him. He placed one palm flat on the folder and opened it slowly, like someone lifting the lid off a memory no one wanted to claim. Then he spoke. Not to the committee, not to the media, but to the room, and to something far beyond it. "There's a town in southern Ohio called Elwood. You won't find it in many headlines. You might have driven past it without knowing it. No Starbucks, no political rallies, just rusting street signs and a football field that doubles as a flea market on weekends." His tone stayed steady, but something under the words trembled, a kind of reverence. In 2009, Elwood was promised a redevelopment grant, federal dollars approved under a bipartisan infrastructure recovery package. It made the local paper. People got hopeful. One factory started hiring again. A welding program reopened at the community college. He flipped the first page in the folder. It wasn't a spreadsheet, it was a photo. This man's name is Harold Riggins, Vietnam veteran, father of 3. He lived in a trailer off State Route 38. When the funding stalled, the heating assistance programs were quietly retracted. The local nonprofit closed. He called for help when his propane ran out. No one came. JD looked up. He froze to death in January. A few people shifted in their seats. One of the younger staffers pressed a knuckle to his mouth. The image of Harold remained on the screen behind JD, faded but dignified. A flag on the porch behind him, folded lawn chair out front. This isn't about one town or one man. It's about how we write promises in ink and erase them in silence. He turned to face Pelosi directly, not with accusation, but with something colder, something heavier. Elwood was on the original recovery list. Line 47. The money was approved. The town was ready. Then someone removed it. Quietly, deliberately. He paused. Someone buried it. There it was. The room cracked open. Murmurs began in every direction. Staffers whispering, senators adjusting their microphones, journalists tapping texts to producers. Pelosi didn't move, but her jaw tightened, just barely, enough for the cameras to catch it. The committee chair leaned in, voice measured. "Senator Vance, are you alleging that federal recovery funds were misallocated intentionally?" JD didn't blink. "I'm not alleging anything," he said, tapping the folder again. "I brought receipts." He held up the next sheet, this time a budget summary from an internal audit. Several towns listed under initial allocation. Then in red ink, line 47 struck through. Margin note, reallocation pending. No explanation, no follow-up. The initials beside the edit, NPA collective inhale, rippled through the room. JD didn't push further, not yet. He simply set the page down calmly and returned to Harold's photo. "I didn't know Harold, but I know what it feels like to come from a town like his, a place people don't fight for because they forget you're still there." He let the words sit there, just long enough, then almost softly, "But I didn't forget, and I won't be quiet about who did." The rustle of papers never sounded so loud. JD Vance held the page with the calm precision of someone not interested in making a scene, only in making it impossible to look away. Without theatrics, he walked it over to the committee clerk, handed it in, and spoke evenly into the mic. "For the record, a document recovered from an archived internal budget review, time-stamped, authenticated, page 7, section B, budget reallocations." He paused only long enough to let the sound of typing catch up. Line 47 was marked for Elwood, Ohio, initial allocation approved, then redlined in ink. No explanation, no public record of revision, just a note in the margin, reallocate per directive. And below that, he let the last line hang in the air. The chamber leaned forward, visibly now. Sound the initials, NP. A tremor moved through the room, not loud, not explosive, but unmistakable, like the faint rumble before a structural shift. Reporters turned toward Pelosi as if on instinct. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink, but her voice came sharp and swift, cutting through the tension like a scalpel through silk. "This hearing is not for political theater, Senator." The tone was part command, part dismissal. Pelosi's voice had silenced rooms before. She knew how to make opposition feel small, but JD didn't back down. He didn't blink either. Instead, he looked around the chamber slowly, taking in the rows of congressional nameplates, the silent staffers, the blank monitors still glowing with Harold Reagan's face. Then he turned back to the mic, his voice lower but clearer than it had been all morning. Then why does the script always end the same? For the rest of us. A few gasps, a shuffle of feet. Even the stenographer glanced up for half a second before catching herself. JD didn't smile. He didn't grandstand. He simply let the sentence breathe. I didn't write this script. I just come from the part of the country where we live through its consequences, where the names on these lines don't mean political inconvenience. They mean winter without heat. They mean jobs that never came back. They mean funerals. Pelosi's fingers tapped once against her legal pad, sharp and deliberate. Her chief of staff whispered something, but she waved him off. Her eyes were fixed now, directly on JD. Senator Vance, she said more softly now, you are making serious implications without verified context. You're dragging my name into a budget decision made by dozens of people across agencies over a decade ago. JD nodded. Yes, I am. The admission hit like a clean strike. It wasn't reckless, it was intentional. Because somewhere along that line, someone decided Elwood didn't matter, that Harold Reagan's didn't matter. And I think the American people deserve to know who wrote them out of the story. There it was, the shift, the moment a political chamber turns from performance to reckoning. A few senators exchanged glances. One adjusted his tie with nervous fingers. Another leaned back in her seat, eyes narrowing, reconsidering her distance from the woman beside her. JD didn't press further. He knew when to stop. You don't set off dynamite with another blow. You let the dust rise and wait for who coughs first. He closed the folder labeled line 47, then looked at the committee chair. I yield the remainder of my time. But in that moment, time wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the country now, watching, rewinding, and wondering what else had been crossed out behind red ink in quiet corridors. The road into Elwood wasn't paved with memory. It was paved with regret, cracked asphalt, faded paint. A town that once promised prosperity now wore the same quiet decay you see on forgotten postcards. Edges curling, color drained, no one left to send them. J.D. Vance drove slowly through its main street, headlights catching the warped windows of what used to be a diner, a barber shop, a hardware store. All shuttered, all silent. There was no campaign poster here, no American flag crisp in the wind, just a frayed banner half twisted around a leaning pole outside what used to be the VFW. A dog barked once in the distance. No one came out to check. JD parked his truck near a mailbox that had more rust than paint and stepped out. The wind hit him like a memory, cold, dry, and familiar. You don't forget air like this, not if you grew up around it. He checked the address again, 309 Brickner Lane. The house was modest like every house in Elwood. One story, yellowing siding, a porch swing that moved slightly though no one sat in it. He knocked. Once. Twice. The door creaked open slowly. Vance? A gravelly voice asked, cautious but not cold. JD nodded. Frank Doyle? The man who stepped out looked like he had once been carved from certainty, shoulders square, jaw set, but had softened under years of watching too much disappear. He wore an old banker's vest, the kind no one wore anymore, unless they were still holding on to the job title out of habit more than identity. I didn't think you'd actually come, Frank said. You said you had something. I do. He stepped back. Come on, it's in the garage. The garage was detached and colder than the house, smelled faintly of sawdust, metal, and resignation. Stacked milk crates lined one side, filing cabinets the other, and in the far corner, covered in a blue tarp and 2 decades of dust, sat something unmistakably out of place, a set of external hard drives. Frank pulled the tarp off like revealing a long-dead secret. They told us to clear everything out when the program ended, he muttered. Budget files, feasibility reports, audit trails, but something about it didn't sit right. Felt off. JD raised a brow. So you just kept it? Frank gave a tight nod. Didn't think anyone would care. But I couldn't bring myself to dump it. Thought maybe someday someone had come looking. He reached for the nearest drive and wiped it with the sleeve of his jacket. The label, handwritten in red ink, read, Development Projects 2007-2012. Internal Review. JD exhaled through his nose. There was weight in that label, not just paperwork. Possibility. He crouched down, reading each drive, each one neatly labeled by year, region, or status. South Ohio, Phase 2, line 40 to 49 drafts. Deferred allocations, not final. Frank looked down. You're thinking there's something in there that ties it all together. I'm hoping, JD said. There's something in here that makes people finally listen. He stood and locked eyes with the older man. You said you kept it because it felt wrong. I need you to trust that now is the right time to open it. Frank didn't hesitate. Then let's plug it in. The hum of old computers echoed in the back corner of the Elwood Public Library, just loud enough to remind you the machines were still trying. J.D. Vance sat at a plastic desk beneath a flickering fluorescent light, his eyes fixed on the monitor while his aide, Alex, typed with mechanical precision. The hard drives were clunky, slow to load, but intact. Folders blinked open on the screen. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each labeled in codes only a bureaucrat could love. DRP_2009_Phase 3, Q4 modified rework. JD leaned in, elbows on the desk. Try reallocation. Alex typed. 5 folders popped up. Okay, she said, scrolling. We've got emergency redirect, 2008, deferred investment regions, and here, economic recovery reallocations. They opened the last one. Inside, spreadsheets. So many spreadsheets. Each was a snapshot of potential. JD knew the language well. Initial allocation columns, projected impact metrics, priority tiers. They painted a picture of hope, funding for job training, clean water upgrades, clinic expansions. Town names ran down the left margin, some JD recognized from memory, others that sounded like places he'd driven past but never stopped in. And then he saw it, a tab labeled Revised Final Draft, December 21st, 2009. Alex clicked it. The format looked familiar until it didn't. JD narrowed his eyes. Where's the other column? The first draft had town IDs and allocation amounts. This one just skips. Alex frowned. They stripped the line history. It's a clean table. JD pointed. Except for that note. Row 47, line 47, economic recovery, reallocations. Redacted. See attached directive. Alex opened the note link. Access denied. She muttered, classic, then started running a background script. JD leaned back. 38 towns. Alex glanced over. You counted? JD nodded. Yeah, they're not here. They were on the earlier sheet we saw from Frank's physical files. Gone now. Alex toggled between files. That's intentional. They didn't just delete rows. They submitted a new version with completely renumbered lines. Look, line 47 in the draft was Elwood. In this one, it's blank. Then it jumps to 48, but with a new town we never saw before. Frank, who'd been watching from the side, said quietly, we knew something was off. We called DC twice back in the day. They told us it was a clerical reshuffle, said the funds would come in waves, but the waves never came. JD exhaled. Because they were never meant to. He clicked open the metadata on the document. The author field was encrypted, typical, but one internal comment box remained. A single line. All reclassifications per strategic guidance. Final approval, NPJD stared at it. Red ink, digital fingerprint. The initials again. NP, he folded his arms, jaw tense. Same initials, same erasure. This isn't budget mechanics, this is a quiet strike. Alex scrolled further, more carefully now. Here's the kicker. Some of these towns didn't just get cut. Their names got reassigned to existing budget lines in other regions. Look, this town in Virginia got a funding bump equal to Elwood's original number, but no new justification, no new need statement. It's like they just absorbed it. JD's voice was flat. Moved it where the headlines were, where the cameras go. Alex looked up. What do we do with this? JD didn't answer right away. He looked over his shoulder at the librarian shelving a stack of paperback westerns. A poster on the wall read, "Your tax dollars keep us reading." Ironic. He turned back to the screen. "We do what no one's done for them in over a decade," he said. "We say their names, and we don't blink when the lights come on." The call connected on the third ring. No voicemail, no assistant, just a clipped, familiar voice. "Vance?" JD nodded instinctively, even though no one could see him. "Paul, it's me." Paul Reyes had been a federal budget analyst for 23 years, 10 of those inside the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the rest scattered across task forces and fiscal response units most Americans never knew existed. JD trusted him not because Paul had power, but because he no longer wanted any. "I've got something I need you to verify," JD said. "Old reallocation drafts, 2009 to 2011. Elwood. Others." There was a pause, then the sound of a desk chair creaking back. "I figured you'd come across those one day." "So you've seen them?" Another pause. He could hear Paul shift again. "I saw the originals, and I saw what happened when they were corrected." "Were they ever published?" Paul's voice dropped. "Not a chance. They were buried under a continuity memo in a discretionary authority clause. Basically, the kind of stuff no one outside of 4 cubicles could decode. They scrubbed the names. But we knew. We all knew." JD glanced at the spreadsheet still glowing on the library computer beside him. "You ever say anything?" Paul sighed. "To who, JD? To the Senate committee that signed off on it? To the press that wouldn't care unless it came with pictures of a burning building? I was a budget guy, not a martyr." The line went quiet for a moment. "But if you're asking," Paul added, "then I know it's not going away quietly." JD nodded again. "Thanks." He ended the call. Behind him, Alex was still scanning documents on a second screen, her brow furrowed. She had been quiet for the last 20 minutes, focused, but not at peace. "He confirmed it, didn't he?" she asked, not looking up. JD didn't answer right away. He just sat back and stared at the image of Lean 47, redacted into silence. "That's what I thought," she said. Then more quietly, "If you go public, they'll come after you." Hard. JD looked at her, studying the way she said it, not out of fear, but out of loyalty, out of concern for the reality that neither of them could now escape. "They'll hit you in the press," she continued, "undermine you on the floor, strip you off every committee you care about, maybe even dig into your personal file, make it about ambition, not justice." JD stood, closed the folder. His eyes didn't harden. They sharpened. "Good," he said. "Let them." He paused. "I've got 38 names that say otherwise." That sentence didn't echo. It settled, like weight, like earth being shoveled over a buried truth. And this time, someone standing there with a spade, ready to unearth every forgotten name. Alex finally looked up, and her expression shifted. No more warnings, just quiet resolve. "Then we'd better not flinch." JD nodded, his voice low but sure. "We won't." And with that, they began packing the files, not with hesitation, but with the methodical stillness of people who know exactly what war they're walking into. The lights in JD Vance's home office were dim, just a single desk lamp casting long shadows over stacks of printed spreadsheets, Post-it notes, and a slowly rotating ceiling fan that clicked every 7th turn. He sat in front of a modest webcam, wearing a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled up, no tie. Not a senator tonight, just a father. Just a man who knew tomorrow would test something deeper than courage. He leaned forward and hit record. "Hey guys," he said softly, looking into the lens as if it were the eyes of his kids, because in a way it was. "I don't know if you'll see this today, or a year from now, or ever, but just in case, I wanted you to know why I did what I'm doing. If I disappear from TV or get booted off a committee, or you hear people calling me names on the news," he took a breath, looked down, then back up. "And this is why." He held up a thin stack of pages. The top one read, Town 1, Elwood, Ohio. Below it, a grainy photo of Harold Riggins, smiling on his porch with a flag behind him. JD flipped to the next page. Town 2, Alders Fork, WV. Then another. and another. "I made this old school," he said, almost with a smile. "A flip book. Each town that disappeared from the final budget, one by one. Not the charts, not the politics, just the faces. Because I didn't want to make a point. I wanted to name the abandoned." He clicked off the camera. The silence in the room felt heavier now. Later that night, at the kitchen table, dinner had grown cold. His wife, Usha, pushed a plate toward him anyway. "At least try," she said. "You've been at that desk for 6 hours." JD took a bite out of politeness more than hunger. Then quietly, "Do you remember that map in civics class? The one with red states, blue states, and all the white space in between?" Usha nodded, setting her fork down. "That's who I'm doing this for," he said. "The places they color in last. The ones no one campaigns in anymore unless there's a scandal or a tornado. I'm not making a point. I'm naming the abandoned." Usha looked at him for a long moment. "You know this might cost you everything in Washington, right?" JD gave a soft smile. "Then maybe Washington was never the point." The clock ticked behind them. No TV, no background noise. Just two people sitting in the stillness before everything changes. Before heading to bed, JD placed the flip book gently into his briefcase. Next to it, he added the printed copy of the spreadsheet with the red line on line 47. He paused, then reached for a manila envelope, wrote in firm letters across the front, "If I'm shut down, read this." He tucked it at the very bottom of the case. As he turned out the light, he didn't look back at the desk or the screen still glowing faintly from the video he had just recorded. He didn't need to. Tomorrow he would walk into a room that wasn't waiting to listen, but he would speak anyway. The hearing room was already filling when JD Vance walked in, 30 minutes ahead of schedule. Reporters were still setting up tripods, aides arranging placards, and cameras calibrating for lighting. But JD moved with a quiet certainty, as if the vote had already happened, and he was just there to read the verdict. He didn't stop at his assigned seat. He walked straight to the central display monitor, handed a flash drive to the technician, and whispered 4 words. "Don't play it yet." Then he turned to his briefcase and pulled out a rolled chart. With measured care, he clipped it onto the portable easel next to the podium. It was handmade, not sleek, not digital, but it was impossible to ignore. At the top, bold letters read, "The Budget Blackout." Beneath it, a full map of the United States, colored not in party lines but in black, gray, and red. The black marks indicated the 38 towns that had been removed. The red lines connected them to the line items they were erased from. And the gray zones? "That's where the money went," JD later told a journalist, "where the headlines were louder than the silence." By the time the room was full, JD had already settled into his seat, calm, alone, focused. Nancy Pelosi entered with a practiced gait, flanked by aides, and took her place with a tight smile and a glance toward the easel. Her brow furrowed slightly. The smile didn't return. When the hearing was called to order, she wasted no time. "Before we proceed," she said, voice smooth but clipped, "let me remind this committee that today's session is meant to advance the conversation on equitable distribution, not indulge in personalized spectacle." JD didn't rise immediately. He waited for the chair to recognize him. "Senator Vance, 5 minutes." He stood, no notes, just the flip book in his hand and the silence that followed him like a shadow. "I'm not here for spectacle," he said. "I'm here for clarity." He walked to the easel, tapped the top of the map. "This is a blackout map, not of power, but of visibility. These are the towns that disappeared from our budget, quietly, systematically." He opened the flipbook. Town 1, Elwood, Ohio. 327 jobs lost. 1 community clinic shut down. Suicide rate tripled in 6 years. Town 2, Alders Fork, West Virginia. Local elementary school closed. Only grocery store boarded up. Entire zip code now served by a mobile pharmacy. Twice a month. He kept turning pages, one by one. Town by town, name by name. Each had a number. Each had a human cost. Frost Point, Kentucky. Sewage treatment stalled. Water lines cracked. Teen overdose rate doubled since 2011. Harper Glen, Indiana. Ambulance coverage reduced from 24/7 to 4 hours per day. Fire department now volunteers using borrowed gear. No one moved. No one spoke. Pelosi interjected sharply. "Senator Vance, We've asked you to focus on future-oriented solutions, not retrospective grievance airing. JD turned to her without missing a beat. With all due respect, Madam Speaker, I've reviewed enough future-oriented plans to know they never include the people already lost. He held up the last page. A list of all 38 towns, black and white, no commentary. These aren't abstractions. They're not political footballs. They're Americans, left out of spreadsheets, and then blamed for their own silence. He placed the flipbook down, and for a brief second, just stood there, his hand resting gently on the podium. I'm not trying to win today, he said. I'm just refusing to let them lose in silence. The hearing adjourned without applause. No press conference, no handshake lines, just murmurs and muffled footsteps as the room emptied like it was trying to forget what it had just witnessed. But forgetting wouldn't be so easy. By late afternoon, a clip of JD's testimony, specifically the moment he said, "I'm not trying to win today," had already begun circulating on social media. One network led with a lower third banner. JD Vance, budget bombshell or political theater? That evening, Nancy Pelosi stepped before a podium draped in the American flag. Cameras rolled. Journalists leaned forward, pens ready. Her voice, always composed, came with an added steel this time. Let me be clear, she said. What we witnessed today was not oversight. It was not governance. It was performance. Senator Vance is not the first to peddle fear, nor will he be the last. But this chamber should not become a stage for populist showmen exploiting grief for political gain. The reporters scribbled. One asked if she was denying the towns had been cut. Pelosi nodded carefully. Budget decisions are made across departments and years. To isolate edits, redact context, and accuse individuals is reckless. Dangerous even. This isn't truth. It's theater. The soundbite was swift, clean, sharpened for prime time. He's not exposing the truth. He's manufacturing outrage. Elsewhere across town, J.D. Vance sat in a dim hotel room with his laptop open, the screen casting a cold glow across his face. Alex stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the live stream replay on mute. Populist showman, she repeated. That's going to be tomorrow's headline. J.D. didn't respond right away. He scrolled through his files, stopping on the original PDF document, the one with the red lines, the initials, the timestamp. She's scared, he said finally. Alex raised a brow. She doesn't look scared. J.D. shook his head. Not of me, of what happens if people start believing I'm right. He clicked open the metadata again, verified the edit history, confirmed the date. The initials were still there. NP, no password, no encryption, just a file sitting in the digital shadows for over a decade. You're not going to leak it, are you? Alex asked, a bit cautious. JD looked at her. I'm not leaking anything. I'm uploading a public record that never should have been hidden in the first place. He opened the Congressional Public Archives portal, a quiet website mostly for policy wonks and staffers, but tonight it would hold something else. File name, line 47 redlinefinal.pdf. Tag, unreleased internal budget memo, 2009. Before clicking submit, JD paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. When truth scares you, he said aloud, more to himself than anyone else, maybe you've built something fragile. He hit upload. It took only 12 seconds, but they felt like history being written in slow motion. Alex exhaled. It's done, JD nodded. Now it's not just my word. Outside the window, the Capitol dome was lit but distant, gleaming like something sacred and unreachable. But tonight, from this room, with nothing more than a PDF file and a conviction that wouldn't bend, JD had done more than speak. He had made it impossible to forget. By dawn, the internet had already decided. JD Vance's 5-minute testimony, posted just after midnight with the unassuming title, Line 47, The Towns We Erased, had shattered through algorithm walls like a hammer in a museum. The clip had no flashy music, no edits, no media spin. Just one man at a microphone reading names that weren't supposed to be heard. By 7:12 a.m., it had 8.3 million views. The hashtag budgetline47 began trending before breakfast. It jumped from political Twitter to TikTok, where users stitched the video with reactions, some crying, others angry, many just stunned. One viral comment said, "I'm from one of those towns. I thought we were just forgotten. Turns out we were erased." In Elwood, the sidewalks came alive for the first time in years. A local teacher painted, "We're not erased," in bold white letters across the gym wall. Someone else printed the phrase on cardboard and stuck it in the cracked window of the old post office. At the diner, Harold Riggins' nephew stood out front, holding a sign with his uncle's photo and the words, "He wasn't fiction." CNN ran the segment under the headline, "Vance sparks budget reckoning, real people, redline towns." Fox opened with a split screen, JD on the left, Pelosi on the right. Beneath it, populist push or policy truth. But it wasn't just cable, it was deeper, quieter. A mother in West Virginia posted a handwritten note her son brought home from school. It read, "Mr. Vance said our town's name in front of everyone. So I wrote it too." It had over 120,000 shares in 2 hours. On Substack, a national columnist wrote a rare, apolitical piece. In 5 minutes, J.D. Vance did something Washington hasn't managed in decades. He changed the language of working-class dignity, not with numbers. With names in Washington, aides scrambled. Journalists scrambled faster. Even offices with no stake in the matter began fact-checking the document he uploaded. Everything checked out. The red lines were real. The initials were there. The silence was broken. But the most telling sign came not from a news desk or a trending chart, but from the eyes of a man named Tom Garvey, a retired steelworker who watched the clip on an old laptop in his trailer just outside of Dunlow, Kentucky. He didn't say a word, just sat there in his flannel shirt, staring at the screen, as JD read out his town's name, the same name he hadn't seen printed anywhere in years. His granddaughter sat beside him and asked softly, "Did you know him?" And he said no, but he knew us. JD didn't see any of it that morning. He was in transit, on a train headed back to D.C., head resting against the window, earbuds in, but no music playing. Alex sat across from him, watching the clip's numbers climb on her phone. "It's happening," she whispered. "You lit the match." JD didn't move, just stared at the gray blur of landscape outside, where real towns had real names, and where truth finally had an audience. The door to J.D. Vance's office opened without a knock. That in itself was a message. Standing in the doorway was Congressional Whip Nolan Mercer, third-ranking Republican in the Senate, with the look of a man who rarely repeated himself and never entered a room without reason. He wasn't alone. 2 senior aides trailed behind him, holding files they had no intention of letting JD read. Mercer didn't sit. He stood just far enough inside the office to own it without permission. "We need to talk." JD looked up from his desk, still cluttered with handwritten town names and marked up budgets. He gestured to the seat across from him. Mercer ignored it. "You made your point," Mercer began. "It landed. You got the clicks. Now it's time to reel it back in." JD didn't answer. "You've got leadership rattled. Committee heads are fielding calls from donors they haven't heard from in 5 years, and you're dragging internal memos from a decade ago into primetime scandal territory. That's not oversight. That's suicide." JD leaned back in his chair. "You read the file?" Mercer's jaw flexed. "I read enough. Enough to know you're not doing us favors." "I wasn't elected to do you favors," JD said evenly. "I was elected to speak for the people no one else is listening to." Mercer crossed his arms. "Pull back, or be pulled off. You like your committee seats? Judiciary? Veterans Affairs? Consider them soft privileges." JD's eyes narrowed. "You want me quiet? That's how they got forgotten in the first place." A charged silence passed between them. No shouting, just quiet steel. "This is bigger than you," Mercer warned. "You take down one signature and half the building could fall with it." JD stood now too. Same height, same calm. "Then maybe we need a new building." Mercer didn't reply. He turned and left with a tension that lingered in the air, like the static before a storm. The aides didn't speak either. They closed the door behind them with bureaucratic finality. Across the room, Alex was already scrolling through her phone. "They're not wasting time," she said. "I've got 3 emails from legal counsel warning us about irresponsible dissemination of confidential material, and someone just requested access to your residency history, probably a fishing expedition. JD sat back down and folded his hands. Let them dig. I hope they choke on it. Alex looked up, hesitant. This won't be a slow burn anymore. They're coming fast. I know, she paused. If they come for me, they will. Alex nodded. No fear, just clarity. JD picked up a small notepad and jotted down a line from memory. It wasn't for speeches, just for himself. Truth doesn't just threaten power, it reveals who was hiding behind it. He looked out the office window. The Capitol dome stood tall in the distance, spotless, glowing. But he knew better now, knew how many walls inside that building had been built not to shelter justice, but to smother it. And still, he wasn't moving. The phone rang at 9:43 p.m. JD was alone in his office again, the halls outside quiet as a church after midnight. He didn't recognize the number. DC area code, but unlisted. He let it ring twice more, then answered. Vance. The voice on the other end was old, measured, gravel-edged. The kind of voice that used to command rooms, now reduced to a whisper meant for confession. Senator Vance, you don't know me, but I know what you've uncovered. JD paused. Who is this? Name's Harmon Keene. I served Arkansas. Retired 12 years now. I was on the budget committee the year Line 47 got gutted. JD leaned forward slowly, unsure if this was a trick, a trap, or something rarer. The truth. I watched those edits happen, the man continued. Saw the early drafts, saw the red lines. I even remember when Elwood's line item disappeared. I was told it was being consolidated under an urban renewal cluster. I didn't ask questions. I didn't raise my hand. I was told to trust the process. JD's jaw tightened. But you knew it wasn't just a process. Oh, I knew. I knew exactly what it was. Political triage. Cut the towns with no leverage. Shift funds to places that vote louder. JD stood walking slowly toward the window, phone pressed to his ear. Why are you calling me now? A silence, then, because you made the silence louder than my fear. JD didn't speak. He didn't need to. Keene went on. I'm 78. I've had 2 strokes. I don't need a legacy. But I also don't want to leave this world with my name chained to cowardice. If you need me to testify, I'll do it, on record, under oath. I'll say what I saw. I'll say who signed off. And I'll say who told us not to ask why. JD closed his eyes, letting the words settle like dust in a room that hadn't been disturbed in decades. I need more than testimony, he said. I need the public to feel it, to understand how long this has been rotting beneath them. Then you need someone who was there when the rot started. I was in that room. You say the word and I'll stand in front of any camera you point at me. JD exhaled, eyes still fixed on the Capitol dome glowing in the dark. You sure you're ready for the blowback? Keene chuckled. It wasn't bitter, just tired. Son, at my age, blowback is just a breeze I forgot to feel. There was something raw in that laugh, something JD hadn't heard in days, honesty that no longer feared consequence. Thank you, JD said quietly. No, Senator, thank you for saying what I should have said back then. They ended the call with no fanfare, no promises, just a shared moment between 2 men on opposite ends of a political generation, one who kept quiet and one who no longer could. JD placed the phone down gently, then opened his flip book again, thumbing through each town like a rosary of names. The past had finally spoken, and now the future would have to listen. By Tuesday morning, JD's office printers were groaning, not from press releases or subpoenas, but from something far less expected and far more powerful. Letters. Hundreds of them. By the end of the day, the count had passed 614. Some were typed, most weren't. Folded notebook paper, pages torn from diaries, cards from nursing homes, napkins scrawled in pencil. The postage marks came from across the country: Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, Southern Illinois, Northern Missouri, towns JD had mentioned, and towns he hadn't. Alex stood in the hallway holding a stack in both arms, her expression unreadable. They keep coming, she said simply. JD took one at random and unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky but determined. Dear Senator Vance, I cried when I heard the name Willow Junction. That's my home. I thought no one remembered our ZIP code. I didn't even know anyone in Washington knew it existed. He read another. You said my father's town on national television. He passed last year, but I think he would have smiled. And another. Please don't stop. We don't have lobbyists. We just have mailboxes. The staff cleared one of the walls in the back conference room, removed a whiteboard, pinned the first 50 letters in neat rows. By noon, it was 100. By Wednesday, it was floor to ceiling. Aides started calling it the wall, not in jest, in reverence. Each morning, more letters arrived. Some included family photos. Others had maps of towns with circles around the post office or the old train depot. Places that had once meant everything, now reduced to memory and ink. Even those JD hadn't named wrote in. You didn't say our name, but you said what it feels like to be erased. And that was enough. One note, short and smudged, was taped to the center of the wall. You turned our silence into something loud. At the end of the week, a Capitol janitor who'd worked the building for 22 years walked past the office door while JD was inside, alone, taping another letter to the wall. The man hesitated. JD looked up and nodded politely. The janitor stepped inside. Sorry, I saw the news. JD smiled. It's okay. Want to come in? The janitor approached the wall slowly, eyes moving across it like scanning a memorial. Thank you for that list, he said, voice quiet. I saw my home there. JD blinked. Which town? Pine Hollow, Arkansas. You said it third. I didn't expect to hear it again. Not here. He touched the edge of one envelope gently, then nodded to himself and stepped back. JD stood there long after the man had gone. He didn't need applause. He had names, and now they had voices. By Thursday, the air inside the Capitol buzzed not with outrage, but with strategy. Nancy Pelosi, long a master of narrative recovery, stepped into the press room at precisely 11 a.m., surrounded by digital screens, union reps, and a curated lineup of young professionals. The backdrop behind her read in bold, modern font, the Unity Recovery Plan. There was applause on cue. Cameras flashed. We've heard the voices, she began. We've seen the data. And we're responding, not with blame, but with bold steps forward. The Unity Recovery Plan is a comprehensive initiative to reinvest in overlooked communities across America, urban, rural, and everything in between. Reporters listened closely, pens ready, but the details never quite landed. No list of specific towns, no mention of the 38 red line names, just broad strokes, underserved areas, targeted acceleration zones, and a phrase that landed like a prepackaged slogan, it's time we rebuild together. The presentation ended with a polished video, dramatic music, stock footage of factories restarting, children jumping rope in slow motion, a smiling farmer waving from a porch. It was clean, market-tested, ready to lead the headlines. But outside, on the Capitol steps, J.D. Vance stood in front of a row of microphones in a worn blue windbreaker. No teleprompter, no production team. He waited for the press to approach. They did. Senator Vance, any comment on Speaker Pelosi's Unity Recovery Plan? J.D. nodded once. Calm, then stepped forward and spoke directly to the lenses. You can rename the plan, but not the damage. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single folded page, creased at the corners. Slowly, he opened it. It wasn't a policy sheet. It was a drawing, crayon on printer paper, scribbled in uneven lines. On the left, a green field with trees and stick figures, a swing set, a little square labeled ICECREAM. The top of the page read, Elwood Park before. On the right, the same space but empty. The trees gone, the swing set broken, a gray cloud overhead. Elwood Park and after. J.D. held it up without explanation. This was mailed to my office by a 7-year-old girl in Elwood, Ohio. Her name is Kaylee. She doesn't understand legislation. She doesn't know what redlining is, but she knows what it means when her town gets left behind. He lowered the page, voice steady. What we heard today wasn't a plan. It was branding. The towns that were erased didn't need rebranding. They needed remembering. There was a stillness around him. Even the most seasoned reporters didn't shout the next question. "You want to recover unity?" JD asked. "Start by calling things what they are. Say the names. Say what was taken. Say who signed the paper." He didn't wait for follow-ups. He folded the drawing back into thirds, tucked it into his coat pocket, and walked down the marble steps in silence. Behind him, the sound of cameras clicking. Somewhere inside, a press secretary was already drafting a rebuttal. But none of that mattered in that moment. Not compared to a little girl's drawing that had said more than any program name ever could. The town of Monroe, Indiana, wasn't on most maps unless you zoomed in far enough. It had a single traffic light, 2 diners, one of which only served breakfast, and a train line that hadn't run since J.D. Vance was in high school. But that week, something began to bloom along the side of the old municipal building. Not with funding, not with press, just with paint. At first, it was just gray primer. Then a few names appeared, stenciled in black against the pale wall: Elwood, Dunlow, Pine Hollow, Alder's Fork. Within days, more were added. And then came the spreadsheet. Someone, no one in town would say exactly who, projected an image of the original Line 47 draft onto the wall at night and traced it by hand. Every row, every column, even the margin note that had changed everything. Reallocate per directive. But what drew people in, what made them slow down their trucks and step out into the street, was what sat painted across the top in bold, rust-red lettering. Truth was buried here, and someone came back for it. Word spread fast, not through headlines but through phone calls, group texts, and porch conversations. People began showing up just to touch the bricks, as if the wall itself could confirm what they had suspected for years. We weren't crazy. We were erased. By the time JD arrived, there were folding chairs scattered along the curb and a pot of black coffee brewing in a church thermos. He didn't make a speech. He didn't even bring staff. He stepped out of the car alone. A woman in a Monroe high sweatshirt approached him first. "You really came," she said, as if she hadn't fully believed it until he stood there in front of her. JD looked at the mural, studied the names, the red line, the initials at the bottom, NP. He nodded slowly. "I had to." A teenage boy, maybe 16, maybe younger, tapped him on the elbow. "You mind signing it?" JD blinked. "The wall?" The boy held up a Sharpie. "People have been adding initials. You should too." JD hesitated, then walked over. Beneath the quote at the top, there were already a dozen sets of initials, some clear, others scribbled by trembling hands. He found an open space near the bottom left corner. Then, with deliberate care, he wrote JDV. He stepped back, hands in his pockets. A small group clapped. Not loud, not performative, just enough. Someone brought out a folding chair and handed him a styrofoam cup of coffee. He sat quietly, staring at the mural as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the spreadsheet lines now turned to art. He didn't speak again that day. He didn't need to. The wall was doing just fine on its own. The morning light poured through the windows like a spotlight, soft, steady, but exposing everything. JD stood in front of the mirror, knotting his tie with slow, deliberate movements. It was a simple navy silk, nothing flashy, but this one was different. Printed on the inside lining, just beneath where the fabric folded and vanished into the jacket, were 38 names. Not in bold, not in color, just clean black print. Each name set in a single column. Each name once removed from a budget, now stitched into his spine. He adjusted the knot once more, pulling it tight against the collar. There was something ritualistic about it, something final. From the hallway, small footsteps approached. His son, barefoot and half awake, leaned against the doorway. "Dad, are you scared?" JD paused, then looked into the mirror. Not at the tie, not at the suit, but at his own eyes. There was no bravado in them, just a kind of resolve shaped by too many late nights and too many names he couldn't forget. He turned and crouched to eye level. "Yeah," he said honestly, "but I'm ready too." The boy nodded, unsure what to do with that, then reached forward and smoothed the edge of JD's jacket like it might protect him. "Then go say their names," he whispered. JD stood, blinked once, and walked down the hall. In the car, Alex was waiting. Laptop open, earbuds in, eyes scanning something off screen. She didn't look up when he got in, just said, "The networks are on full alert. They've been tipped. Everyone's assuming you're going for the throat today." JD buckled his seatbelt. "They're not wrong." She glanced at him now, not worried, just focused. "They're going to try to cut your mic, maybe on a procedural technicality, maybe mid-sentence. Doesn't matter." JD leaned back in the seat. "Then I'll speak louder." Alex nodded once, then added quietly, "Pelosi requested a second podium. She's planning a preemptive response. Probably polished, definitely sharp." JD smiled faintly. "Good. Let her bring the polish. I'll bring the truth." The car moved through DC traffic like a needle through cloth, slow, precise, and threading past monuments that had outlived generations of voices just like his. But today wasn't about the buildings. It was about the names he carried just beneath his jacket, pressed against his chest like a hidden oath. In the Senate office, the energy had shifted. Staffers didn't say much as he passed. Some nodded. A few averted their eyes. Everyone knew. This wasn't just a hearing. It was something else. As JD stepped into the chamber hallway, a junior aide ran up behind him, holding a message card. "Senator, last chance. Want to submit remarks in writing instead?" JD looked at the card, then at the chamber doors. "No, I want them to hear it." He walked in, the tie steady beneath his suit, the names pressing against his heart like the weight of everything that was never supposed to return. He didn't unfold the speech in front of him. He just stood there, hands resting on either side of the podium, eyes sweeping the room. Cameras already blinking red, senators shifting in their seats, Pelosi's eyes unreadable. Alex sat motionless in the staffer row, clutching a notepad but not writing. JD cleared his throat, then opened the small flip book he'd brought, the same one he'd shown his kids. This wasn't paper for argument, it was paper for memory. "I'm not here to argue numbers," he began. "I'm here to name what the numbers erased." He flipped to the first page. "Hollisburg, Ohio, one clinic, closed last year. Mr. Price died of a stroke in a parking lot because the nearest ER was now 46 miles away. Flip. Candler, Georgia, 47 teachers laid off. A boy named Marcus sent us a letter, said his school library had been replaced by a vending machine." Flip. Greystone, Illinois, 200 jobs lost. The town's Christmas tree last year was made from welded scrap because they couldn't afford a real one, but they lit it anyway. Flip, he continued. Each name followed by a wound. Each story sharp but short. No theatrics, no shouting. Just wounds the nation had learned to live with until someone read them out loud. One senator coughed. Another turned their chair slightly away. But no one interrupted. The flipbook kept turning. His voice never rose, but the weight of his words thickened the air. Parker Mills, West Virginia, home of Donnie G., a veteran who built the town's community center with his bare hands. He died last year. The building's now padlocked, but his wife still waters the flowers outside. Flip. Elwood. You've heard me talk about it. The veteran who froze to death because federal heating funds never arrived. You call that anecdotal. I call that a man who served. His fingers slowed on the last page. Then he looked up. Eyes now fully lifted, scanning each senator, not as opponents, but as witnesses. You didn't erase these people with a vote. You erased them with silence, with signatures that redlined towns into ghosts. He paused, letting the silence settle. But ghosts don't stay gone when you name them. He closed the flipbook, then reached into his jacket, pulled out his tie, turned it inside out so they could see. 38 names, inked in black. These were never my stories. These were ours, erased in budgets, but burned into memory. One last look around the chamber. Not just mine, yours. He stepped away. No gavel drop, no applause. Just the hum of cameras capturing something Congress hadn't seen in a long time. A speech not meant to win, but to remember. At first there was nothing. No comment, no motion, no sound but the air system humming faintly behind the marble. JD had returned to his seat like he hadn't just lit a fire in the center of the chamber. His tie, still flipped inside out, rested quietly on his chest like a flag no one had yet saluted. Pelosi didn't move. She just tapped her index finger against her binder, slow and tight, the way a conductor counts off a silence she didn't choose. The majority whip avoided JD's eyes. A few aides shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling. Then from the far left side of the chamber, the senator from Wisconsin stood up. Gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses. A reputation for procedural caution, not emotional protest. He didn't say a word, just stood and began to clap. Once, twice, slow, firm, unapologetic. At first, it sounded like the only real thing in the room. Then from 2 rows behind, another pair of hands joined in, then 3, then 5. A ripple, reluctant at first, then spreading. Some clapped without rising. Some stood but didn't clap. Some glanced nervously at the gallery as if unsure how history would score this moment. But the silence broke. Even Pelosi shifted slightly, though whether in discomfort or decision, no one could say. JD didn't look around. He stayed seated, hands folded, the tie now a quiet monument. But Alex, seated above in the staffer section, closed her eyes just for a second, like someone who'd been holding their breath for months. Outside the Capitol, someone posted the moment online within minutes. The title was simple: "The Day Silence Ended." The clip spread like wildfire. By evening, it had played across cable news networks with urgency usually reserved for election nights. One network anchor paused her segment midway, eyes still damp from the footage. "This wasn't a speech," she said softly. "It was a resurrection." And it wasn't just pundits. Across town in Elwood, a bar turned off the jukebox for the first time in 5 years. Dozens stood watching the clip again on a grainy television, faces lit only by the screen. When JD read their town's name, a woman in the back whispered, "That's our boy," though no one could confirm if she'd ever even met him. And in Monroe, where the mural stood, someone chalked a new line beneath the original quote, "They tried to bury us, but someone knew where to dig." Back in Washington, the official Senate response was more complicated. That night, inboxes at the Capitol overflowed. Not with outrage, but stories. From mayors, from teachers, from single mothers and steel workers and librarians who still ran story hour even without heating in the building. All writing the same message in different words. "We saw our name. We didn't think anyone ever would." JD didn't respond publicly that night. He went home, tucked the flip book into a drawer, and sat on the porch with his wife as the sun disappeared behind the city skyline. She reached over, touched the inside of his tie, and smiled. "They know now." He nodded and whispered, "Now the real fight begins." The whistle blew at 6 a.m., not to start a shift, but to announce a beginning. For the first time in 16 years, the steel mill in Elwood let its gates swing wide again. Rust had been scrubbed. Chains had been oiled. Walls, once etched with graffiti and windburn, now bore a fresh coat of blue-gray paint. Some called it recovery gray. But it wasn't the color that made people gather that morning. It was the plaque bolted beside the main entrance. No logos, no political party stamp, just words carved into brushed steel. "Line 47, you tried to bury us." He refused. No press conference, no stage, just folding chairs in the cold and the smell of new concrete. Former steel workers stood in line not for handouts, but to clock in. Some wore their old helmets like trophies. Others brought their kids to see it, and a few just stood still, staring up at the sign like it might dissolve if they blinked too hard. Behind the crowd, J.D. Vance stood in the last row. No tie, no staff, just a dark coat and a quiet nod when someone turned around and whispered, "That's him." He didn't move, didn't wave, just folded his arms as the factory's floor manager took the mic and cleared his throat. "My dad worked this line. My son starts it today." That alone got the loudest cheer. After that, the doors opened, and one by one, boots crossed the threshold like it was holy ground. Someone began humming the tune of an old Union song. Another joined. Soon the hum became words, off-key but strong, as if the building itself had been waiting to hear them again. No reporters caught the moment when JD touched the edge of the plaque with his gloved hand, ran a thumb across the words, and smiled faintly. Alex, watching from the far side, snapped a photo. She didn't post it. She just saved it with the file name. Proof. Again. As workers settled into their new stations, a local high school band played from the parking lot. It wasn't flawless, but it was theirs. That evening, in a letter pinned inside the break room, someone had written in black ink, "We are not a footnote. We're a beginning." JD didn't give a speech that day. He didn't need to. The machines did the talking now. And as the first sheets of steel rolled off the line and the siren rang for break time, someone spray-painted the inside of the factory gate. Not to deface, but to declare, "Line 47 lives here now." It arrived in a plain envelope. No return address, just a Monroe zip code and the careful cursive of someone who had written to authority before and been ignored. JD opened it late, long after most of the staff had gone home. The lights in his office buzzed low. Outside, rain patted against the windows like a metronome. Inside the envelope was a single page, folded 3 times. A flag patch, faded but intact, slipped out and landed on his desk with the softness of something that had been held too tightly for too long. The letter began without greeting. "I didn't vote for you. I wasn't sure I even liked how you spoke. But I prayed someone like you would come around before I left this earth. Someone stubborn enough to knock on the door and loud enough to make them open it." She didn't sign her full name, just Agnes R. from Monroe. And her story didn't beg for sympathy. It documented silence. "My husband Walter served in Korea, came home, worked in the lumber yard until his knees gave out. We thought we'd done everything right. Then came the winter 2 years ago, when his care home lost its heating for 6 days straight. He couldn't fight frostbite and pneumonia at the same time, so he died with a blanket wrapped around his legs and no one answering the emergency line." JD didn't move. He read that line 3 times, each slower than the last. Agnes's handwriting, neat but trembling, filled the margins with thoughts she hadn't planned to say. "They told me the state would fix it, that funds were delayed, that it wasn't anyone's fault. But I learned it wasn't a delay, it was a deletion. Line 47. She had circled those 2 words. "So when I saw you read that list in the Senate, when I heard you say Monroe like it hadn't already disappeared, I cried. And I don't cry easy, that's what the patch is for. It came off Walter's last jacket. You don't have to do anything with it, just know someone kept track, and someone remembers." JD set the letter down carefully, like setting a stone on a grave. He ran his fingers over the patch, stitched with old thread and a quiet kind of loyalty. It was the kind of object that didn't make a sound, but could fill a room if you let it. He thought about how many stories like hers never made it past voicemail, how many envelopes never got stamped, how many names never got read aloud. Then he stood up, walked over to the wall where his staff had been pinning news clippings, and without ceremony, pinned the patch beside a photo of the Monroe mural. He didn't say anything, but from that day forward, every visitor who walked into his office noticed it first. Not the flags, not the books. Just a small piece of cloth. A quiet sentence sewn in red, white, and blue. And underneath, Agnes's words written on a post-it note, barely visible but impossible to forget. "I didn't vote for you, but I remembered you." The street lamps around Capitol Hill flickered like tired sentinels. JD Vance walked alone, his coat collar turned up against the evening wind, his pace steady but slow. No press trailed him now, no aides with folders, no camera flashes demanding sound bites. Just the echo of his footsteps tapping lightly on the old stone walkways that had seen centuries of promises, kept, broken, buried. His tie was looser than usual, the names printed inside still pressed gently against his chest, like a quiet heartbeat that hadn't stopped reminding him what started all of this. He carried nothing but a folded paper in his coat pocket. Agnes's letter. Capitol Hill stood tall behind him, glowing faintly against the indigo sky. Its columns were still clean, its windows still lit. But JD wasn't looking back. He was walking forward. Across the street, a boy on a rusted bike zigzagged between the sidewalk cracks, the kind of ride only kids could make look graceful. He passed JD, turned back slightly, and called out with the innocent clarity of someone who had only heard pieces of the noise. "Hey, you're the guy who said Elwood." JD turned. A smile pulled across his face. small and tired but real. "I guess I am," he said quietly. The boy didn't stop writing. He just lifted his hand in a quick wave and coasted off toward the city, disappearing down a block without a single care about the cameras or the Capitol or the weight of names printed on ties. JD stood there for a long moment, watching the shadow of the bike fade into the orange glow of the next lamppost. Then he looked down at the steps beneath him, steps worn down by feet that never made the news, and began walking again. And as he moved, the voiceover entered, not loud, not triumphant, just steady, like a match lit in a dark room, warm enough to see by. Sometimes justice isn't about rewriting the whole story. It's about rereading the part we skipped. It's not always a firestorm. Sometimes it's a spark that refuses to die. One town, one tie, one truth. Sometimes justice isn't about changing the world, just reminding it who it left behind. He turned a corner and disappeared from view. No fanfare, no final speech. Just the quiet presence of a man who chose not to look away, and the faint echo of a child's voice in the background, still repeating that single word, Elwood. The camera doesn't follow him. It lingers, on the empty street, on the Capitol lights behind, and slowly, gently, we fade out. But we do not go cold. We fade out with fire. What lingers after this story isn't just J.D. Vance's courage. It's the quiet power of choosing not to look away. In a world where truth is often redacted, where names become footnotes, one voice refusing silence can reignite what bureaucracy tried to bury. J.D. didn't ask for applause. He asked for memory. And in doing so, he reminded us that justice isn't always loud or clean. It's persistent, human, and deeply inconvenient for those who benefit from forgetting. This wasn't a tale about heroism in the traditional sense. It was about presence, about standing still when the rest move on, about being willing to carry forgotten names through rooms built to erase them. And sometimes change begins not with a roar, but with a whisper that dares to stay. Now we ask you, what name would you carry if the world needed reminding? Let us know in the comments. Your voice might be the spark someone else is waiting for. If this story touches you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to JD Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching JD Stories.